Colleagues, I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting 22 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Pursuant to Standing Order 10831 and the motion adopted by the committee on June 16, 2022, we are continuing the study of research and scientific publication in French. Pour garantir le bon déroulement.
To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules for the witnesses and members. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Please mute your mic when you're not speaking. For interpretation, those participating through Zoom have the choice at the bottom of your screen between three channels: floor, English, or French. Members attending in person in the room can use their headset and select the channel desired. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses must be addressed through the chair.
If you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding. In accordance with our routine motion, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Tonight, I am pleased to welcome to our committee, appearing as an individual, Nathalie Lewis, Professeur, Université du Québec à Rimouski.
Professor from the University of Quebec at Rimouski.
We have Martine Lagacé, Associate Vice President, Research Promotion and Development. Each of our witnesses will have 5 minutes. At the 4.5-minute mark, I will hold up this yellow card. It lets you know you have 30 seconds. And I'll just say, because we have interpretation, and if notes were not submitted in advance, if you can make sure to speak a little more slowly so that we have translation. And with that, we welcome you. We say thank you for coming. And we will go to Professor Lewis for 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour. Merci de l'invitation.
Thank you for this invitation, and good evening, everyone. I'll get right to the point because 5 minutes is very short. Canada uses the French and English, both French and English languages, and this is very important for me. I'd like to take the 5 minutes that I have on an aspect of French that is very important. Canada is a neutral country in the Francophonie. I have just returned from Tunisia on the Francophonie, and I saw the impact that Canada has, the impact of French, and the positive contribution that Canada makes. So the country has a very important role to play. Science cannot go without French. We are talking about the organization and the structure of the language and of research. During these difficult times, we cannot deprive ourselves of this diversity. We need to have feedback in all areas. It's not just about publishing information just for a resume, but to get the information out, the ideas out. Science makes an important contribution. The interpreter apologizes, but the sound quality is deteriorating discriminating to such an extent that it is virtually impossible to interpret.
Actuelle et internationale de la science, c'est à travers la publication scientifique que cette circulation opère.
Sorry, I'll have to stop for a second. We're having trouble with the interpretation. Can we try again? Going to suspend briefly to try and sort this out. And work out the interpretation issues. Perhaps if Vice President Lagacé is willing, we could go to you while they try and work out the interpretation in the background. Would you be so willing?
Absolument.
Thank
Merci
you
beaucoup.
so very much. The floor is yours for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais d'abord commencer en...
Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to start by thanking the members of the committee for giving me this opportunity to speak. As the Vice President, Research, Promotion and Development, but also personally as a Francophone researcher who produces research in both official languages. And I'll explain a little later what happens with research in French. That Francophones means that Francophones often tend to produce their documents in English. As the 2021 ACFAS report reminds us, research, and more generally science in French, has a profound impact on the vitality and the sense of linguistic well-being of Francophone Canadians. Far from simply enriching the Canadian Francophone pedagogical, academic, and professional lexicon, it provides the scientific expertise that is essential to the implementation of training programs, various policies, and adequate services for Francophone minority communities. Through the production and dissemination of solid educational resources, French language research makes possible a continuum of quality education, ensures the next generation of Francophone communities, and promotes a Canadian Francophone scientific culture whose influence extends well beyond national borders. Now, the issue that you raise here this evening goes well beyond the Francophone communities. It's about the future of Canada's scientific diplomacy. It's about its ability to influence the destiny of a community of 300 million speakers, citizens of the world, on every continent. The future of research in French is the future of Canada's scientific, industrial, and humanitarian presence in the world. As a member of the G7, Canada plays a leading role, and Canada can influence many international issues, be they economic, environmental, or other. The ability of our research community to produce compelling analysis and studies in French adds to this sphere of influence for which our country is so well known. Unfortunately, as you've often heard, we've seen that there is an erosion of the production of documents in French. And the continued decline in grant applications written in French, the low success rate in funding competitions, and consequently, the chronic underfunding of research in French point to a rapid, if you will, disappearance of science in French, and a scientific diplomacy, a disappearance of that as well in Canada. The three granting councils have been alerted for many years to this decline, and the few measures that have been put in place have unfortunately not had a significant effect. We're convinced that the strengthening of research and the support of dissemination of French language publishing requires closer collaboration. And for me, collaboration is the key word here this evening. Collaboration between researchers, universities, and actors who fund research, notably the federal granting councils.
Nous naviguons.
The University of Ottawa is doing its part and has a very privileged position. We have two communities, Francophones and Anglophones. We are in a very privileged position, but we still see a rapid decrease in research and science in French. We support research in French and science in French at the University of Ottawa. I think, for example, the Presse universitaire de l'Université d'Ottawa, the research press, which is the only bilingual in North America. In 2003, the University of Ottawa created a College of Research Chairs on the Francophone world to support high-level research in French. It is 10 research chairs in French, Francophone ones, who are grouped together under this umbrella, and they, for example, do research on cultural heritage, digital health, the Francophonie. And we have also put in place a bilingual knowledge mobilization strategy that supports our researchers in pursuing their work in their own language, despite the attraction that the scope of English language publications may have and the decrease to try to counter the decrease in French. I'll end with a recommendation. We would support, among others, the actions proposed earlier for the publication of research in French, a strategy that would help recognize knowledge and research in science in French, and it would allow the Canadian scientific community to play an even bigger role, not only here in the country, but elsewhere across the world. There's also a coordination of the different actors.
Interrupt. Yes, I apologize, and you've been so gracious and taking over. We thank you, and I'm just going to hear from our clerk. Thank you very much for your testimony. We're glad you're here. We are going to now try and go to Professor Lewis again and see if this will work again. And if you could, we'll start at the beginning.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez mieux?
Can you hear me better?
Could you start at the beginning?
Parfait. Donc, merci.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry for the sound issues. What I was saying was that I will be speaking today about something that seems important for Francophone publication for science. I was telling you about the privileged position of Canada within the Francophonie. And it's something that I think is important. Science cannot, for the diversity of knowledge, not take French into account. There's also the organization and structure of thought. That's why diversity and linguistic diversity is very important. I'm a sociologist of the environment. We have a variety of issues. We cannot not have linguistic diversity. We need feedback and research among all levels. It's not just publishing for our career. It's to share knowledge. That's what's important to me as a scientist. We have to recognize that there's much Anglicization. We could go on about why, the causes, but what I want to focus on today is this movement, the sharing of scientific knowledge and ideas. Currently, the way scientists are organized, it is done through publication. And the publication and the sharing of ideas must be international to be able to share ideas properly. English is used majoritarily as the international languages is decreasing. This is a real challenge. There's a link between theory and practice, and it means that all of us have fewer ways to share ideas. The intersectorial, interconnectedness of language as well. The interpreter knows that the quality of the sound makes it difficult to interpret properly. We have continued to work on the state of science. We stated that Canada has a responsibility towards research and science. It could take on a bigger role. There are scientific publications, peer-reviewed publications. That means other scientists working in the same area. The tool, the vehicle, let's call it that, even though it's much more complicated than that, it is the dominating tool that allows for the discussion and the sharing of research and innovation. That means that French is also, in the past, French was just as important, but that's no longer the case. The current model forces researchers to publish and to be visible and promote certain scientific reviews more than others. This is something that is well recognized, even though I can't delve into it here. It's not just Francophone publication that is seeing a decline. Now, in terms of publications, let's go back to the diversity of ideas, of ways to veiculate these ideas. Most often, the publications are related to Anglo-Saxon dominating publishers. We need to destandardize ways of thinking. There needs to be more support for Francophone publications, but
the time is up, but you have an interested committee. They will ask you questions. Thank you to you both for being here. We're going to go to our first round of questions. These are for 6 minutes, and tonight we begin with Mr. Tucker.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for our witnesses here tonight. I'm going to start in with Martine from the University of Ottawa, and just talking about the chairs that you talked about. I believe you said there was 10 French, specifically 10 chairs.
This is correct, yes.
And on the website, I believe that I read somewhere that there was 94 in total. Is that a current number of how many chairs are available at the University of Ottawa?
You're talking about internal or external chairs?
I would say internal chairs, because what are the French ones? Are they referred to as internal or external?
Oh, I think there must be close to about more than 70 internal chairs.
70 internal. So could you identified those 10, but what would be the breakdown of all the chairs then? Is it just the 10 of whatever that number is, or is there other ones that would work and publish in French but doesn't fall within those 10?
Aside from those 10 chairs, I mean, individual professors can decide to publish their work in either French or English. But aside from those 10, no, there are no other chairs, if I'm answering understanding your question correctly.
No, I'm just trying to understand, what you have control over is who you assign those chairs to. And you assign 10 of, I believe, 94 just for French-only speaking and publishing professors, if that's correct.
It is correct. And these chairs were created actually to support publishing in French that we tend to see moving backwards right now at University of Ottawa. Many Francophone professors tend to make the decision that if you publish in English, your impact factor will increase substantially. It will change your reputation internationally because everyone knows in the world of research that if you publish, for example, in the Journal of Applied Gerontology, which is an American journal, your reputation as a researcher will va être augmentée de manière incrémentielle, si on veut.
Will increase exponentially.
In a Francophone journal, of course, my reputation, my influence as a researcher will be obviously reduced. That's a fact per se. So hence the importance of either, for example, creating support for Francophone researchers, translation, for example, a translation service that could help them translate their publications from French to English, and as such increase their influence and reputation worldwide. Mais je vais poursuivre en français. Moi-même,
I will continue in French. Myself, as a researcher, I often have decided to go from French to English publications, even though I'm a Francophile. But I know that my reach is much wider when I publish in English. It's not comparable in French, unfortunately, because there's just a larger pool of readers. And so many researchers, Francophone researchers, give up and decide to publish only in English.
There's, if the problem is, to your point, is that there's so many people that would read English over French, it doesn't matter how much dollars that we potentially could invest in trying to get more publications. If the eyeballs are still going to be the same ratio, is it actually going to accomplish what some believe needs fixing?
but it's also a matter of diversity of knowledge. French will never disappear. Il y a une grande communauté de
There is a large community of Francophone researchers around the world. We could publish just in English, but that would mean that we would be missing out on all of this knowledge and this diversity. Of course, there are more readers for Anglophone and English language publications and so on, but Francophones also have researchers have this duty to make sure that Francophone readers have access to that knowledge as well. So I come back to one of our recommendations, and that is support for Francophone researchers so that they can continue to create knowledge in French, and that we establish a translation service in order to help reach more readers in English, so the knowledge would go around in both languages.
Where bilingualism is one of our core values. To be able to publish in both languages is extremely important for the creation and for the circulation of knowledge. Alors, les francophones sont moins avantagés.
Francophones have fewer advantages in that respect.
The question.
Yes.
Do you see I'm with you on some of your arguments, but Of these 10, back to these 10 chairs, because it shows a little bit of the Institute's kind of direction. How many of those 10 are working on humanities and social sciences versus STEM or natural sciences?
Most of the chairs in Francophone research are in social sciences and humanities, which says a lot, by the way. It says a lot, by the way. It means that traditional pure science is completely, almost left out of French research en français. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. We appreciate that. And now we're going to go to Ms. Diab for 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Alors, merci.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to both professors, Dr. Lewis and Dr. Lagacé. Dr. Lewis, I saw that you raised your hand, so I'll give you a few minutes now to give us your answers on exactly that question that Mr. Tucker asked with Dr. Lagacé.
Écoutez, je m'inscris un peu dans ce qui a été dit.
Well, I agree with what Ms. Lagacé said, and that takes me back to the comments I made about linguistic diversity that goes beyond the language, but the way that one formulates their thoughts, for example. In some cases, it's not just about translating it, it's about thinking. And I myself studied at the University of Ottawa, and there's a different way of formulating one's thoughts. The scientific thoughts are different, and so this is a very rich diversity that we need to preserve and maintain. The francophonie is not insignificant. There are many francophones outside of Canada, and they too deserve to have an opportunity to exchange ideas with us. This can help us to understand realities that are different from ours, ways of enriching our way of looking at things. Translation is often not sufficient to reflect that diversity. It's one solution, but we need to encourage the publication of scientific information in French so that we can continue to have that diversity. We have a system that at the university, because we're in the eastern part of Quebec, there are very few Anglophones in our region, very few English-speaking students. So there is a need for French in science in French, in social sciences. For example, they publish more in French in journals, etc. And so we need to have other scientific areas edited and produced in French as well. But translation is not the only answer. Thank you, Ms. Lewis. I do have an additional question. What role do post-secondary institutions play to ensure that their professors are able to communicate in French? Now, for you, it's easier, perhaps, because you're in the province of Quebec. But for you, Ms. Lagacé, what would you say to that? Well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, at the University of Ottawa, we attempt to put in place a variety of initiatives to support our researchers so that they produce knowledge in French. Now, I talked about les presses, the bilingual press that produce course materials, for example, and other documents. I talked about the research chairs in the Francophone world. We've also recently put in place a knowledge mobilization strategy at the University of Ottawa, which also helps with the production of research materials in both official languages. And we've got a number of partnerships, research partnerships, for example, with the National Consortium for Health Information, with the Institute of Knowledge from the Montfort Hospital. We have partnerships that have been established abroad with France, for example, Belgium. So that's the way that we try to create this. But we're in an ecosystem, so it's not easy. And I mentioned the federal granting councils, which need to do more so that Francophone researchers across the country can work together. Research is a highly complex field. We need to come together, join forces with Quebec, with Moncton, with Ontario, with the West, with Francophones. And in order to do so, we need the help of the granting councils. We need that pan-Canadian strategy. Yes, you wrapped up your remarks with a recommendation to that effect, talking about a federal strategy. Could you elaborate on that a few moments, because I believe that I have a few seconds left? Well, a federal strategy to support research for scientific information that would enable us, for example, to recognize the importance of Canada's role in advancing research, and it would enable the community to play an even bigger role in other countries. And this is one of the recommendations from the 21 ACFAS report. And that means coordinating all federal actors, departments, agencies, research councils, which are directly involved in research and science in French within universities, which are in Francophone universities, in order to ensure better synergy, collaboration, in order to maximize the impact of all steps taken, of all groups involved.
Thank you, Ms. Diab. Thank you, Vice President Lagacé. And now we will go, Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca.
We'll now go to you, Mr. Blanchet-Jonca. Well, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing before us on this important study this evening. I'd like to start my questions with Ms. Lewis. Good evening, Ms. Lewis, and thank you for being here. You're accustomed to these types of Francophone meetings in social sciences with your area of expertise in sociology. You were in Tunisia 2 weeks ago, you said. You participated in the meeting of the Francophone Sociology Group. Could you tell us a little bit about that? What countries were participants from? Were they facing similar issues? What were your findings? What can you report back from your most recent trip to Tunisia? Well, thank you for the question. First of all, participants came from Francophone-speaking Africa, North Africa. Many European researchers were in attendance, and some from North America. Last week wasn't an excellent time for North American researchers because we're in the middle of a session in university, but there were many young Francophone PhD students, researchers who were very keen to meet with others in order to discuss scientific issues. So we saw that there was a great need for it. And as I said, they were looking to Canada and the role that Canada can play. And in Africa, as I said, we were in Tunisia. So what we noted, and what I've noticed since I came back, I've been receiving requests for more research in French. People are calling for that. But it's a system that doesn't help Francophone researchers the way it's set up currently. Madame Lagacé pointed out that the system doesn't encourage people to write and publish in French. What is examined as part of the applications for funding to the granting councils are publications in certain types of journals, and those are generally not often French publications. So researchers from the Francophone countries are confronted with that, and we're seeing a decrease in interest for publishing in French, even in countries where the scientific language in use is French. So it's a model that is, if you will, pushing us towards using English. Well, thank you, Ms. Lewis. Could you give us some recommendations then, or make some suggestions with respect to what we could do to turn things around, to encourage more publication of research in French? Well, first and foremost, I think that if the responsibility is on the shoulders of the researchers, well, that's a lot. That's a lot to expect of them, because the model is an international model for those types of publications. So we need Canada-wide assistance to bring French-speaking researchers together, to bring the research together. Scientific publication today is in scientific journals. Now, I'm involved in one of them on the environment. It's an international journal. But it's a big burden to support these journals, because it's, in addition to the work that we do, it's a great deal of volunteer work. However, I think that if we had some assistance for the publication of research in French, across Canada support, to counter, if you will, this decrease in publication in French, that would be helpful. And I think that we would need an association, and I'm thinking back to the ACFAS report of 2021. It made some excellent recommendations. And I think we need to value French as a language of science internationally. There are many studies that have shown the impact of language, be it Portuguese or Spanish. Oftentimes, the languages are used nationally, but the international language of use is English. I think that French could have and must have an international role to play, and Canada, through an association, a more robust association, could help us in that regard. Ms. Lewis, could you tell us a little bit about your experience? Now, you're a researcher. The bulk of your publications are in French, and I congratulate you for that. Now, what encouraged you to publish your scientific research in French? And secondly, what could you suggest to young researchers or to encourage them to publish in French? Well, I've also published in English, but indeed, in the past few years, I have been focusing more on publishing in French. As I said, to pass on or transmit the...
Pardon.
It's
very difficult for me. I apologize. Mr. Blanchet-Jonca.
Written answer?
Oui, s'il vous plaît.
Okay.
Professeur Lewis, vous allez pouvoir nous transmettre.
Professor Lewis, perhaps you could send your answer in writing then? Thank you.
We'll go to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, and I thank the witnesses for being with us this evening. I'm going to start with Professor Lagacé. You talked, just to get something clear, you talked about a low success rate in funding competitions, presumably for Francophone applicants. And yet, at least from NSERC, we heard Marc Fortin testified that for applicants from the University of Ottawa who applied in French versus those that applied in English, the Francophone applicants had a higher success rate. So there seems to be some difference in that. But I just wanted to point that out. You also were suggesting giving Francophone researchers help in translating from French to English, I assume, so they could publish in English, do their research in French, publish in English. We've heard, again, from other witnesses that they would actually, for instance, if you wanted them to apply in French, even though they're a Francophone, they needed help from other Francophones to figure out how to best fill out those applications in French. It doesn't seem perhaps logical on the surface, but that's, they were surrounded by people applying in English who could help them in English. So I'm just wondering, we seem to have this dilemma between, accepting that the lingua franca of world publishing, at least in terms of science, is in English. There seems to me little that Canada as a country or a federal government could do to change that. But I'm just wondering what specifically the federal government could do to encourage French research in Canada, especially in the natural sciences, which is a world I come from. How can we help that while still recognizing this big elephant in the room, which is that everybody in science in the world is publishing in English?
Je vous remercie beaucoup d'abord pour votre question. Je pense que...
First, thank you for your question. This might come back to an issue of financial support and monitoring of federal granting institutions in the production of disseminating knowledge in French in the community and university contexts, in minority contexts also. We could start there. Of course, we can't require any researchers to submit applications for grants in one language or another. Professor Lewis also noted this, but there's this idea among Francophone researchers that obtaining grants and having an international reputation as a researcher goes through publishing in English. Does that mean that we need to place greater importance on publication in French by universities, by federal actors, by others? I think maybe it does. Why do many Francophone researchers decide to move from English to French publishing? There's got to be a reason for that as well. There is the issue of the rate of success for getting grants. We have numbers that show that researchers who apply for grants in French don't get as many. The numbers are lower in French. I'll give you an example. I was asked to observe applications for grants throughout the country, from everywhere across the country, from the University of Montreal, the University of Ottawa, of Calgary. Everything was in English, even though you had entirely Francophone teams. And that's why I have a question. What's happening among Francophone researchers? Did they just give up because they know that the numbers just aren't in their favor? I don't have the answers, but what we want to do is promote and support research and science in French. The federal government already does, but more needs to be done to the 3 granting councils, for example. That's something to think about, especially for Francophone researchers in particular. Thank you.
Okay, and I just want you to perhaps comment on something that we've heard as well, this difference between research in the social sciences, where French seems to be holding its own, perhaps more so than in the health sciences and in the natural sciences, where it has declined. And I'm assuming that's because in the social sciences, a lot of the research is in Francophone communities in Quebec, for instance. So it's logical to publish that in French because that is the audience you're looking at.
Je peux répondre?
Is that
Oui.
true?
May I answer?
So
Like I say, Mr. Cannings has 2 seconds left, so perhaps Mr. Cannings would like to ask you for a written answer,
Oui.
if he would like, Mr. Soroka. Thank you, Mr. Cannings. We're now going to go to the 5-minute round. And Mr. Tucker, it's my understanding this is going to go to Mr. Blanchet-Jonca. Thank you very much. Mr. Blanchet-Jonca, the floor is yours.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll continue with my questions then for Dr. Lagacé. I'm very pleased to have you here. And I'd like to congratulate you. I heard the podcast on the research in citizenship and language. That was very interesting. I encourage my colleagues to go and listen to it regarding research in French. Dr. Lagacé, you talked about the University of Ottawa, the biggest or the most significant university, bilingual university, not just in Canada, but around the world. Do you have any numbers given the amount of research or publications in French and in English? Well, I indicated that we have the university presses, and they're the oldest bilingual presses in North America. And so they publish 28 to 30 works by year, each year rather, and about half is in French. So, but proportionally speaking, looking at everything that's published at the University of Ottawa, do you know what the percentage is of works in French compared to in English? I don't have it off the top of my head, but I could provide it to you in writing. Thank you. Dr. Lagacé, you talked about the classification of publications, and we've seen that it can demote the status of French publications. There's the San Francisco Declaration on Research, on Research Assessment, DORA as it's called. You said that the various factors impact the research and the perception of research to devalue French language research. Well, you clearly stated it. There are quantifiable indexes that are used to really look and rank that. Because there isn't that impact, as much of that impact in French, we get a lower grade right off the bat. Coming back to what we said, the universities can do something about that, but there also needs to be more collaboration at a higher level and to really rethink how universities are classified and what we want to promote and encourage among just that. Yet you talked, Dr. Lagacé, about how universities need to do their part, but why did the University of Ottawa not sign this San Francisco Declaration? You said that the University of Ottawa is the biggest bilingual university in Canada and in the world, and we want to promote the publication of scientific research in French. So why did the University of Ottawa not use its leadership and sign the San Francisco Declaration that really clearly sets out the problem? Well, I'm not saying that we will not be signing this agreement, but I have to point out that DORA is one of many instruments. The University of Ottawa is a visionary, is a leader. I was talking about the strategy to mobilize knowledge. This knowledge mobilization strategy is at the heart of the research strategy, and what it does is promote something other than simply numerical factors in creating knowledge. So we really support our Francophone research that are mobilizing. You talked about SRSM. Well, that's very high on our radar in terms of supporting research in French. I understand. I understand that one day you're thinking about signing DORA, but it was published in 2013. I understand that you have to take the time to assess it. But many universities in Canada have signed this declaration. So why nearly 10 years later has the largest bilingual university in the world not signed this agreement? That clearly sets out a problem you're pointing out as well. How can the federal government and other francophone scientific actors make things move if they're not taking the steps? I'm trying to understand how actors with the federal government can help when the institutions aren't doing their part necessarily. Well, I wouldn't conclude that not having signed DORA means not having leadership in research in French.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And again, we really do want to recognize all our witnesses for coming and their time and their effort and their expertise. We'll now go to Ms. Bradford for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to both witnesses for your time this evening. So, Dr. Lagacé, I'd like to start with kind of a more general question because of your unique situation with a truly bilingual university. What are the specific challenges faced by Francophone universities and faculties in provinces with an Anglophone majority?
Quels sont les défis, pardon?
What are the challenges? Sorry, I didn't hear the question properly.
Francophone university or faculty in a province that's, or in a territory that is primarily Anglophone. What are the unique challenges from an institutional perspective?
Oui. Merci beaucoup pour la question. D'abord,
thank you very much for this question. Yes, first of all, we find ourselves in a doubly minority situation. We're a minority within the minority, but within the university, once again, what it means is often that the researchers, the Francophone researchers, will have to, I would say, fight to be heard, to be able to be recognized in a system that promotes more and puts more emphasis on research in French rather than in English. One of the challenges is more that it's a bit more dangerous. The slippery slope is a bit more dangerous in that kind of context.
The next question kind of leads on to that. So what type of services or assistance do researchers need to carry out their activities in French, including conducting their research, publishing their work, organizing scientific events, and applying for funding? So what sort of special assistance would make it easier for them to do that?
I think, well, I mentioned earlier among my recommendations the issue, and my colleague was also talking about translation and how that's only one of the elements we'd recommend. We also want to promote the creation of knowledge in French to start with, but perhaps supporting researchers with translation services that would allow them to write their research in French, but then to have it disseminated to more people, to a larger pool, so that in English as well, so that their works, their scientific works, can be disseminated in English as well. But once again, there's also a role to be played by the granting councils and granting bodies so that it's clear that Francophones really be encouraged to apply for funding in French. We see it less and less, actually, at the 3 granting bodies. Perhaps having these councils more openly promote and encourage Francophone researchers to submit their applications in French, and that we could have in place committees that would ensure that there's the proper rate of success. I mean, monitoring is not quite the right word, but a committee that would ensure that there isn't de facto disadvantage for people who apply for funding in French.
That's once the applications get to those funding councils. But to what extent can the services that are going to encourage the applications in the first place by Francophones, how can those be provided by the university? And how can the universities be encouraged to assist or offer those services so that they get more applications to these funding councils?
Nous, à l'intérieur de
Within our university, we already have support services for preparing applications for funding. Francophone researchers are encouraged to prepare their applications in French. We support them in preparing these applications, whether they're French or English. The University of Ottawa is a bilingual university, but we still see a lot of Francophone researchers to, despite everything, submit their applications to the the granting councils rather, in English, because there's concern or worries about the lower numbers in terms of success for getting that funding. So that goes beyond the University of Ottawa.
So what role could the federal government play in this respect then? Is there any role for the federal government in encouraging more of these applications to be made, by Francophones in French?
Je pense qu'il serait bien.
I think it would be good to, as much as possible, put in place a committee, a permanent committee within the granting councils, the 3 granting councils, to ensure that the support to Francophone researchers is really something that's discussed. In terms of the federal government, we need to work on that synergy, the collaboration, tie together what's happening in Quebec, Ontario, New Brunswick, Alberta, elsewhere.
Dr. Lewis.
Sorry, Ms. Bradford. My apologies. I'd like to thank all our witnesses. We thank you for coming, for your time, for your expertise, for sharing your ideas. We hope it's been a good experience for you, and we hope that you will want to come back, and we'd really like to thank you. With that, colleagues, we will suspend briefly to get ready for our second panel. Thank you again.
Merci beaucoup.
Colleagues, I'm going to call this meeting back to order. And we're beginning panel 2. J'aimerais faire quelques
I'd like to make some comments for members and for participants. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you're on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. For interpretation, for those participating through Zoom, you have the choice on the bottom of your screen between 3 channels: the floor, English, or French. Members attending in person in the room can use their headset and select the desired channel. I'd like to remind you that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair.
Welcome you to this panel. We are grateful to have tonight from the Fédération Acadienne de la Nouvelle-Écosse, President Kenneth DeVoe, welcome. And from Université Sainte-Anne, Alistair Surratt, President and Vice Chancellor. Welcome to you both. We're delighted to have you. Each of you will have 5 minutes to present. At the 4.5-minute mark, I will hold up this card. It lets you know there's 30 seconds left. And with that, we say welcome. Thank you for joining us. And we begin with President DeVoe. The floor is yours.
Okay, merci beaucoup.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here this evening, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak to you. As a member of the community and in my professional capacity, I must say that I have a great deal of experience. I was in charge of research at Sainte-Anne. I was a very active researcher as well. I focused on Francophonie issues across Canada and have dealt a great deal with SHIRC. Now, the Nova Scotia Acadian Federation was founded in 1868 and brings together 29 organizations that focus on the global development of Acadian and Francophones in our region. Our federation acts as a spokesperson for Acadians in Nova Scotia, and it's in that capacity that I'm speaking to you here this evening. Our members include the University of Sainte-Anne as well. Now, I sent in a brief. I'm not sure whether you've received it or not, but if you don't have it now, I can't go through it in its entirety at this point, but I hope that you'll have an opportunity to read it. I'd like to focus on some of the key aspects, and perhaps during the question and answer comment, I can expand on it. I'd like to point out that the University Sainte-Anne is a partner for most of our members, and it is a crucial partner for Acadians in Nova Scotia. Research conducted by the institution, by researchers who are part of the Research Association, is absolutely essential for the vitality of our communities for many reasons. And at this point, I don't have time to go over them all, but I would like to draw your attention to a key aspect, an essential part of my presentation. University Sainte-Anne and its research are a critical tool for the development of a sustainable and innovative economy for Nova Scotia. It is very involved, and there is a great deal of collaboration with our entrepreneurs and companies, and that will help us to develop a dynamic, innovative, and sustainable economy in our communities. I'd also like to point out that we conduct research in the area of the environment, health, Sometimes it's directly linked to the francophonie, but not always. But we need that. I have several recommendations to make this evening. I'll have to go over them quite briefly, but I'd like to draw your attention to the Estates General on education, which has described the challenges facing minority Francophone institutions. And I would point out that the Acadian Federation supports each of those recommendations, namely the 6 that deal specifically with research and publication in French. I'd also like to say that the position taken by Sainte-Anne is important, and it's autonomous, and it's influential because it is a French language institution, not bilingual French, but it faces serious challenges. It's a deal with the devil, as we say. The University Sainte-Anne is required to do everything that a large university must do, but with fewer resources. And in addition, as a university, is also responsible for delivering college programs. It must do so in French, but also in English. So we're calling on the federal government to undertake its plan to put into place positive measures to support the publication of research in French in institutions. And we are calling for the implementation of these measures. We want to see specific steps taken to deal with the specific challenges associated with the small size, the isolation, and the...
DeVoe, je suis désolée.
Mr. DeVoe, I apologize. I must have to cut you off.
I know they will want to ask you lots of questions, and I'm sorry to interrupt. We will now go to Monsieur Surette for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you for welcoming me here this evening and for conducting such an important study for the Francophone post-secondary sector in Canada. As was mentioned, I represent the Université Sainte-Anne. I'm the rector and vice chancellor, and it's my 12th year in that position. As Mr. DeVoe also mentioned, Université Sainte-Anne is the only French-language post-secondary institution in Nova Scotia. It's the only French-language university in Nova Scotia. We offer university and college programs, as well as immersion and customized training programs in French as a second language. We are firmly rooted in our community and are a partner of choice for many Acadian and Francophone communities. We focus on enhancing the vitality of regions. And over the past 10 to 12 years, we have made that a strategic focus. And that's how we support our communities. We're a small educational institution. There are some 600 full-time and part-time students. We provide and deliver our education over 5 campuses across the province, with 1 in Halifax, and the 4 other campuses are in the southwest, southwestern Nova Scotia near Digby, and 2 satellite campuses, one on Cape Breton Island in the Francophone and Acadian area. And this includes Saint-Joseph-du-Moine, Petit-de-Gras, Church Point, Tusket, in the rural and coastal communities. These are more isolated communities. They are at least 3 hours away by car from the Halifax airport. And they are official language minority communities. We have distinguished ourselves by our firm commitment to be actively involved in our communities. And we support the development of these communities in their language and culture. We have centers, laboratories, observatories that serve to link researchers with each other and to build bridges with institutions, businesses, and all of our social actors.
So if I could talk a little bit about research, and I'm sure there'll be questions on that later. We definitely support what you heard from the Association of Francophone Canadian Colleges and Universities, and ACFAS, the French Canadian Association for the Advancement of Science, before this committee. I'm noticing that 5 minutes goes by very quickly, so here are some realities of smaller institutions such as University St. Anne. We have fewer graduate programs, and that means fewer students available to support professors in their research projects. And the student support is one of the criteria used to evaluate grant applications to the granting councils. In terms of the most prestigious granting programs, they are less suitable for smaller institutions like ours. Here I can talk about this quickly. You can ask me questions later. We have 2 Canada Research Chairs, and as you may know, as you probably know, if the average total funding from the granting councils falls below $100,000, institutions such as ours are no longer eligible to host a Canada Research Chair. And on top of that, all active chairs need to be deactivated. And we found ourselves in this situation in 2019, which is quite regrettable for our communities and our institution. Just another couple of points that I want to make. It's that many times we, as a Francophone institution, we feel like the only research, or it's seen as though the only research we're doing is in the French language, Acadian communities, and so on. But since we're on a coastal area and we're the only post-secondary institution in the southwest of the province, we are there to support our communities in business development and so on. So we do that.
Sweet Soleil does go very quickly, but you have a really interested committee here. We want to say thank you. We welcome you, and we look forward to hearing the answers with the committee. So now we're going to go to our first round of questions, and this is a 6-minute round, and we begin with Mr. Soroka. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to all the witnesses tonight. Mr. Surratt, I'll start with you. I'm just wondering what you're doing to encourage students to pursue a career in French research and scientific publications.
Well, in that case, I mean, obviously, we're hoping as many of our professors can present projects to the council so that we can have projects to work, and the more professors that we do have that could have research projects, obviously the better off our students would be. But as I mentioned, I was trying to mention in my opening remarks, with less programs of graduate studies, it makes it more difficult for us to engage students in research. However, having said that, the research that we do have here, the number of students that we have on undergraduate studies, a lot of them are involved in research projects. So in fact, in terms of the percentage of our students participating with professors in research projects is quite high within our institution. And because we're so small, we can easily promote that within Université Sainte-Anne.
Just a follow-up question to that as well. With the research that's being done, one of our previous witnesses said that there's a shortage of research assistants. Are you finding that at your university or not at all?
Not in our case. In our case here, the number of projects that we do have, we have a number of applicants of students that are looking to work as research assistants, and in fact, the engagement that we have within our small population, and I think it might be word of mouth or just by culture that's been involved within our own university here. We have a culture of engagement of students that are very interested. And in fact, they take pride in working as assistants with some of our professors.
Oh, my mic wasn't on. Thank you for that. Mr. DeVoe, your organization takes pride in promoting the growth and development of Acadian and Francophone communities in Nova Scotia. I was just wondering how you're able to accomplish this or what successes you've had, if you could give us a bit more on that.
Sure. But could I touch on the question you just asked, Mr. Surratt?
Sure.
So so I guess it's a sort of some contamination between my various roles. We do have a lot of undergraduate assistants, and we take very much pride in incorporating them in our projects. And that is recognized by the research councils, but we think it should be better recognized. Not by the councils, but by the peers themselves. Firstly, and secondly, it would be very important that we find ways in that we're supported. What we try to do to compensate for our lack of graduate and postgraduate fellows, we collaborate with other universities, but a lot of times we have to do that on our dime. And if we could have some support built into the structure, into the support that we get through official languages, not necessarily just through research councils, to facilitate collaboration between Francophone institutions, we could do a lot more with less. Now to your question. So what are successes for the Acadian Federation? I think the strength of the Acadian Federation are its members. So we regroup regional organizations. So in each and every organization in every part of Nova Scotia is covered by a regional organization. We also have provincial organizations that are sector based. But I think one of our real strengths is at the institutional levels. We bring all those members in together with our institutions as well. So our university and our school board are actually part of our federation, and it builds for collaboration. So I think our success really comes through our collaboration. And I think another thing that we have, we will challenge our governments, and we have challenged them like most Francophone organizations have in the courts. If need be. That's always a last resort, but sometimes a necessary one. But that notwithstanding that, we always approach our governments, be they municipal, provincial, or federal, as a willing partner. And we're essentially, I think we're all in this for the same thing. We're just looking for a better community, a better province, and a better country to live in. And we're trying to contribute to that. And I think that's really our success in Nova Scotia.
Okay, well, thank you for that. You had also mentioned, Mr. DeVoe, is that you wanted more support. Are you talking just federal, provincial, municipal, or private as well?
Yes.
Yes to all the above. Okay.
Yes, and that's we strive to. So we're essentially, I think, the key. Oh, I'm sorry.
Please go on.
Can I go now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I can hear myself. It's okay. So essentially, that I think the opportunities to leverage and the support we're looking for is essentially we're looking for support that takes into account our specific challenges. Mr. Surratt mentioned that we're a very small institution that's very far away from the center, be it the center of the province or the center of the country. And I think that
to cut you off
we,
there
we
because I've
we're
only got a
hoping
couple
that
seconds.
structures.
So could you
Okay.
you please reply that in writing, as well as that anything that you or Mr. Surratt had in your opening statements would like to supply to us, please have that in writing as well.
Thank you, Mr. Soroka, and thank you to our witnesses. And with that, we're going to go to Ms. Diab for 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
La bienvenue à Présidente.
I'd like to welcome President Surratt and President DeVoe. I'm very pleased to see you here with us. President Surratt, you talked about University St. Anne and the fact that there are 10 universities in Nova Scotia, but only one that is Francophone. And I know that you played a key role in the development to establish St. Anne as the university that it is today. Could you tell us a little bit more in French and in English? Because earlier,
I ask you the question in English, you're going to respond in English to maximize the understanding of every committee member here tonight, because that's how important the topic that we're studying is, but also the fact that we have someone from the Acadian community and Nova Scotian with us. But can you speak to us a bit about the international connection that you yourself have had outside Canada, but also the University St. Anne, and how does that play, if at all, with the researchers and the work that the university itself is doing, but also in the context of what we are talking about here in this research?
Well, in the context of, I don't know which language to use now. You started in French and went in English. So, en français, peut-être pour commencer, c'est...
In French, perhaps to start, of course, our researchers, our professors deal with other Francophone and Anglophone universities elsewhere, especially Francophone universities in linguistic minority communities. We have a lot of the same challenges, and we also deal with a lot of the Anglophone universities in Nova Scotia and in the Maritimes. We have a network called Springboard for sharing various information within the area. No university, Francophone or Anglophone, has all the expertise, so it's essential to share our knowledge. And at the international level, it's kind of the same thing. We do have agreements signed with universities in France, and we are looking at how to maximize our efforts in various files. So, of course, on the international front, we push that quite often to see whether we can share expertise with colleagues from the rest of the Canadian Francophonie to see if they can support us in some of our research. Thank you very much. And Mr. DeVoe, as a researcher, as a very active researcher yourself, could you tell us about some of the challenges you faced when publishing your own works, but also what you see in Nova Scotia and at University St. Anne or elsewhere in Canada?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Ms. Diab, for that. Well, many of the things I said so far and that the things I'll continue to say probably are related to the perspective of the Canadian Francophonie. As a former researcher, there are publications to my name, and I did receive funding from the National Research Council for the humanities and social sciences and I happened to be in an area where most of the specialists in Canada are from the Canadian Francophonie. I studied and I researched the vitality of Francophone communities in minority situations, and especially, more particularly, the role of French language schools in minority situations. But if my research had been assessed based on their impact, well, I signed or co-signed maybe 30 to 40 publications over the years. the one that is most cited is not the best, but they are the 2 or 3 papers that I published in English. So, for example, at the National Research Council and elsewhere, if they had assessed me based on my reach, I don't think I would have had the same reach. Well, I could speak all day, so I'll just stop there for now.
No, on a encore quelques.
We have a few more minutes, I believe. So what role do you think immigration can play in this area? And I know we worked a lot on that. Not in research necessarily, but now that's what we're talking about. So that's my question for Mr. DeVoe and Mr. Surratt also.
Donc, moi en premier. Je crois en fait.
Well, I'll start. Immigration is an interesting opportunity across the board for the country, for our society, and for our community, and especially here in Nova Scotia. If we think about research, for example, the students that we bring in, the graduate level students, the professors, they'll contribute to building a better society for us all. And I think that as a university, as a Francophone university in Nova Scotia, we have access to pools for recruiting these people that other universities don't have.
Thank you, Ms. Diab. And again,
Merci beaucoup.
Again, I'd like to thank all the witnesses. I'd also like to recognize that Ms. Kayabaga joins us tonight, and we thank her as well. And now we're going to go to Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les témoins.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to say good evening to the witnesses with us this evening. I'll start with you, Mr. DeVoe. Now, we understand that the Acadian community in Nova Scotia is facing some difficulties in publishing in French. Now, I salute the vitality of the community in Nova Scotia, the Acadian community. But do you think that the federal government supports you enough to have a long-term, ongoing research in French? Is there enough support? Answer. Well, thank you for the question. We acknowledge the support that we have. We're grateful for that. And perhaps Mr. Surratt is in a better position to answer the question than I am. But we need structural support. Now, many of the costs that we face in doing the work is related to the fact that we live in an English-speaking community, so we need support. Now, I've already alluded to the support when it comes to collaboration and joint ventures. The campus in Halifax, for example, if they're there, they can find people to cooperate elsewhere. We need to turn to Quebec, to Ontario, oftentimes, and there are costs associated with that. So we do have support from the federal government to do that to sign those type of partnerships, for example, with Quebec, but we'd like to see more support and a recognition for the additional burdens that we bear because of that, because there's also the mobility, the issue of mobility for researchers, for graduate and postgraduate students, and also the fact that we're working in both official languages. Well, thank you, Mr. DeVoe. I'd like to hear you comment, Mr. Surratt, on the same question, if you will. Well, I would answer the same. We recognize that and are grateful for the support that we have. But the other challenge that we face, and there are several. Now, first of all, we're the only Francophone university, and we're working in an environment that is, for the most part, English within our province. But also, we serve coastal communities that are far away. We're the only post-secondary institution, and so we do research, we provide services to the Acadian community. But as I said in my opening remarks, we need to support our industries in the fisheries, in aquaculture, for example. Many of them are Francophones. And so we're a bit divided. Yes, we need to do some research in English, but we also need to respond and meet the needs of our Acadian communities, and we need to do that work. Another challenge that we have in smaller institutions like ours are linked to the fact that we've been doing some research. We've set up an office, a research bureau for applications to support our professors, etc. But it's a big challenge with the limited resources that we have. One thing that the federal government could do, as was recommended by the États généraux, the Estates General on university education, would be to create a service to assist our researchers, French-speaking researchers. Now, clearly, there are more efforts that could be undertaken to value the research, to try to level the playing field, to have as much published as in English, but we do have some support now, but there is a lot more that could be done to provide additional support. Well, thank you, Mr. Surette. You're talking about being on an equal footing, but what we've heard is that there are fewer applications that go in the three granting councils, the three federal granting councils. I'd like to hear some suggestions. Should there be research for publishing in French? I'd like to hear your views on that. And what about at the three granting councils? There are some criteria. Should there be more criteria to encourage people to publish in French? What do you think about those comments? Maybe I'll let Kenneth go first, or I'll start then. Well, I think that what I'm seeing is that I clearly understand the issues between French and English. We're a minority. I understand all of that. I'm talking about equitable, not equal. We need to have some specific measures to support our researchers. A structure that can help us, as I mentioned. I don't think that we need to establish quotas or set aside a specific amount, but we need to focus on mobilization, for example. We need measures to encourage our researchers to present their applications in French, to put them forth in French. Things that are published in English are more widely read. So then maybe there needs to be additional support for translation. Thank you, Mr. DeVoe. Would you like to go ahead? Mr.
That's the 6 minutes. Perhaps someone will follow up with Monsieur Blanchette-Jancas' questions. Thank you. And now we will go to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you to the witnesses for being here this evening. And I just very interesting to hear about University of St. Anne and the Acadian Federation in Nova Scotia. And I guess I'll start with Mr. Surette to talk about St. Anne. You know, you talked about a lot of the challenges that you face, funding research, funding your programs. And it seems that a lot of those challenges come from simply, it's a small institution. And I'm just wondering if you could perhaps indicate, you know, how much of those problems are from the size of your institution versus the fact that it is Francophone in an Anglophone world of Nova Scotia. Have you any sense of where those challenges come from?
That's a great question. And I think it's a chicken and the egg. Obviously, being one of 10 universities in Nova Scotia, I guess the positive part is that when we talk about differentiation between the universities, well, it's quite easy for us to position ourselves as different than the others. That we're the only ones that operate completely in French. We're not a bilingual institution. We operate completely in the French language, which On the other hand, limits us in terms of recruiting, for example, the number of students in Nova Scotia that speak French. We have a French school board, of course. That's one area that we can recruit. And the immersion programs in the English school boards are fantastic these days. So that's another recruitment pool for us, as is the other Atlantic provinces and Canadian provinces. And we also go internationally now that we have over 15 different international countries here represented in the student population. So we're doing fairly well in terms of, holding our own and actually improving our numbers. But yet again, we still remain small compared to the bigger universities in this province and in other parts of Canada, which, economies of scale is always a challenge for us. So in terms of programs, I mean, we're doing fairly well. We're trying to identify programs that the French language is a value added to our students, i.e., education, for example. They can teach in the immersion program, the French school board, and all of our students are fully bilingual, so they can even teach in the English school board. That's one example. But the other part that I really feel is part of our responsibility is to support the Acadian regions of Nova Scotia. And as you probably know, I mean, the four main Acadian regions are all coastal regions. They're largely based on the fishing industry, aquaculture these days. And there was no research facility in southwestern Nova Scotia, which has the highest landings of lobster, for example, in probably the country. That over the years now, we've had the support of the provincial and the federal government to develop a lobster quality research center in this part of the province. So not only, we might be seen as, supporting the French language and the Acadian culture, but we're also supporting the economy of these regions here. So when we're talking about the vitality of some of these smaller regions, and like I mentioned earlier, I mean, we're all at least 3 hours from the main airport in Halifax with no public transit to these regions here. So we're rural, remote areas that needs the support, and an institution such as St. Anne can really play that role.
And just to follow up on that, you mentioned...
Mr. Cannings, sorry, could I just ask you to take your mic slightly away from your face? Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
I thought I tried to do that after my opening remarks, but because it was making some noises. Thank you. So again, just to follow up on that, Mr. Surratt, you talked about, we were just talking about some of the challenges of being small, being, the only Francophone institution, and not to diminish those challenges, but are there any opportunities that you have, any pluses to being a Francophone institution, the only fully Francophone institution in Nova Scotia, not just for attracting students perhaps, but for attracting funding from all levels of government because you are playing that role? Is there any advantages that you see there?
We've certainly had we certainly have the support of the provincial government in terms of our operations, as most of the other institutions have. But because of our minority situation, we've had great support from the federal government under Canadian Heritage, for example. We also have great support from ACOA under the official languages in terms of economic development in this region. So yes, we're positioned, quite differently than the Anglophone universities here in this province. We serve a very specific niche in terms of our population, the Francophone population, which includes, Anglophones that speak French, the immigrants that are the Francophone immigrants that are here now, and as I mentioned earlier, our communities. So depending on where we're at, whether it's entrepreneurship or economic development or programming, we can tap into different levels of especially the federal government, if we're looking at new programming or ways of doing things differently. And we have the operational funding comes mostly from the provincial government or from our student tuition and so on. But special projects, we've had great support from the federal government.
Mr. Cannings, Mr. Cannings, that's the end. Is there a written question?
Okay, sorry. No, that's fine. I can't see your cards from here. So I was just going on gut feeling. But thank you very much to the witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Cannings, and thank you to our witnesses. We'll now go to our 5-minute round, and this time we go to Mr. Blanchette-Chancard.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Je vais retourner pour Monsieur.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to go back to Mr. DeVoe for my next question. There's a trend that we're seeing, efforts undertaken by the federal government. Many witnesses have talked about it under C-13 with respect to recognizing French officially, and it's odd that we're in 2022 and it's not been done yet. But with respect to research in French in the province in Nova Scotia, are you optimistic, pessimistic? Is the federal government doing enough? What could be done in addition to help you? There are fewer and fewer francophones in the province, so it's difficult to. Is it difficult to receive service? Is it difficult to use the language in Nova Scotia? I'm trying to understand that if that's the case, how is it going to be possible to have a long-term project for French, long-term use of it?
Bill C-13 is the good first step. Of course, we work closely with the CFA and our elected officials to get to that bill. Is the bill perfect? Probably not. Is it a good bill? I would say yes. And we'd like to see it passed as quickly as possible, while knowing that there are some clauses in there that will allow us to go back and review it and so on. Now, in terms of how we count Acadians or Francophones in universities and elsewhere, that's a problem, and that's something we need to think about. And that allows me to tie back to a question earlier. In the past, there were special envelopes in terms of the NRC in certain domains for the French language. And maybe that's something we should bring back if we want to support those communities, for example, the Acadian community. Give us the means through the action plan, possibly through an action fund, to support the Acadian Federation, for example, to support research in these institutions to help us better understand our situation, to come up with innovative solutions. Now, possibly immigration, for example. It could be something that helps us how to better integrate people within our society and so on. Thank you very much, Mr. DeVoe. You spoke earlier about structure. We understand that there's a certain isolation that comes with being a minority community, Francophones in Nova Scotia, for example. Is there a way to organize conferences with the Francophone researchers to break that isolation, for example, with Francophone researchers in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada? Well, I spoke about it briefly earlier. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come back to this. If you have the opportunity to read my brief, you'll see that there's that isolation. I mean, there's a good reason. We're small for a reason, and we're far for a reason, for a good reason, due to historical reasons. You'll see that. I mean, I won't get into history here. We don't have time for that. But in terms of cooperation, collaboration, the mobility of research teams and students, that's something definitely that I bring up in my brief, and it would be something really important for the federal government to support that mobility. Thank you very much. Mr. Surratt, I'll give you the opportunity to share with us what you think about those questions. And Madam Chair, if you could give me a warning when I have a few seconds left for a motion, that would be great. But I'll give the floor to Mr. Surratt. Yes, in terms of isolation, we don't feel so isolated, especially with technology today. Of course, we're far less isolated than we have been in the past. We based our institution on 5 campuses, focused a lot on technology, and we are tied in closely to Francophone institutions throughout the country, both inside Quebec, within Quebec, and outside of Quebec. And I chaired the network of Francophone cégeps and colleges that are Francophone in Canada for a while, and so on. There are networks. We do have opportunities to discuss and so on. Oh, I'm so sorry to interrupt, Mr. Surratt. If you have other information to provide, please provide it to us in writing. Yes, here I have a motion that I want to table. There's something that is very important in this, and it's something that's very close to me. I looked at the number of witnesses we were supposed to see here. There were 34 who were supposed to appear, and I counted that nearly 50% who were unable to come here, and that's 14 who weren't, and that's excluding Mr. Quirion, who will be here later, and the minister, that's somebody else from his organization who will be here. Nearly 50% of the witnesses who still haven't appeared for this study in all the lists that the colleagues and I had tabled. I'm very perplexed by this. I'm not sure how I could finish this study without being able to hear from nearly 50% of the witnesses. I understand that when we have lists of witnesses, we don't think that we'll be able to hear from all of them, but seeing that nearly half of them have been unable to appear, well, I compared it to the other studies we've done in the past also. I've tried to look at the number of witnesses, the number of hours, and currently the study on research and scientific publication in French, we only have 16 witnesses who've appeared. And for small modular reactors, we had many more, 32 witnesses in talent retention, and we know that there are other studies, but we had up to 37 witnesses in other studies. So my motion is to add another meeting to allow for more witnesses to appear and to give us their expertise and their support on this issue. And that's what my motion is about. I will read it to you. The interpreter notes that the motion has not been provided to interpretation. This is the table that I will read quickly, and I will be able to send it to the clerk. Well, it's already been translated, but I can send it to you. That the committee, as part of its study into the research of scientific publication in French, hold an extra meeting on the 20th of November to allow witnesses who have not been able to appear so far to be heard before the committee.
It's in order. Should we open this up to, is there any comments from the floor? Thank you, Mr. Blanchet-Chancat. Absolutely.
Before we go on the motion, for the witnesses that are on the screen, are we, I guess my question is, out of respect for the witnesses on the screen, are we finished with questioning them so that they are free to leave? I guess we've done this before in other witnesses, and sometimes witnesses have stayed sitting there for an hour, and I quite frankly felt it was not appropriate. So I just want to put that at the table so that we decide. So out of decency, and respect for the witnesses that are there, are we finished with the questioning for our witnesses?
Thank you, Ms. Diab. That's to the committee. So, Mr. Tucker, do I see you? I think there was a...
Yes, well, I was just going to probably offer if the witnesses would like to stay on and hear the end of this, that would be fine. But I wouldn't be insulted if they tuned off. Maybe they might have some insight on why witnesses weren't showing up at this committee. I'm not sure.
Mr. Tucker, anybody else? Sorry. Oh, thank you. Mr. Cannings. Mr. Cannings? McKinnon. Sorry, Mr. McKinnon. Mr. McKinnon, you're on mute. It's late at night.
Can you hear me now?
We can now, Mr. McKinnon.
Yeah, so I believe my question slot is next. I'd be okay with thanking the witnesses and letting them go. I think we've only got like 7 minutes left anyway.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Is there further comments, colleagues? To respect, are you going to keep debating this? We do have witnesses who've come. Do you want to keep asking them questions, or are you going to debate this now? And I see Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca, you'd like to speak. No. Yeah.
Madam Chair.
Mr. McKinnon.
Yeah, the motion is moved, and I think we have to.
We do, Mr. McKinnon. Yes, that's what we're
So,
doing. We're just trying to.
I just wanted to speak to that. I would like to inquire of the clerk about why the witnesses who have been invited have been unable to attend before we ask for another meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKinnon. To our excellent clerk, are you able to address this, please?
Well, it is case by case in each one. Many remain unanswered after emails or phone calls. Others provide a reason saying, for all these dates, I have a conflict. So I follow up as much as I can, and at a certain point, we move on to the next ones. But each witness that declined would be a different reason.
Mr. McKinnon, do you have your hand up again, or is that a legacy hand?
No, it's a brand fresh one. So I'm not sure that having another meeting is really going to help us. If the witnesses have been unable to make it for all the meetings up to now, I'm not sure that having, extending one more time is going to do any better.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Is there further discussion on this? Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. To respond to my colleague's last comment, well, let's give an example of a witness who couldn't be here tonight, just could not make it. But you have to understand that there was a committee canceled a couple of weeks ago. Not necessarily at the last minute, but it really changed some people's availability and so on, which is partly why a number of witnesses I was able to speak with, well, they just could not appear at another committee meeting since the one they were supposed to be appearing at was completely canceled. So that explains some of the issue. But you'll understand that nearly 50% of witnesses have not been able to appear, and so there's something lacking. The discussions I had with some of them is that simply they couldn't make it at that time, but that's still nearly 50% fewer witnesses than what we've had in the past.
Okay, is there further discussion here? Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca.
Yes. And I'd be ready to have the clerk recontact some of the witnesses, and if there really isn't somebody who can appear, then we can look at things. We have time. We have another committee meeting next week. There's some planning that has gone into it, but I think we need to give these people the opportunity, the witnesses, the opportunity to confirm that they won't be able to appear. Nearly 15 or over 15 witnesses who have not been able to appear during this important study.
committee, I'm looking for some direction here. This is your committee, so we need to come to some decision. I see Mr. Collins and then Mr. Cannings and then Mr. Lobb.
I think Mr. Cannings was before me, Madam Chair. I'll go after.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. I would just point out, I'm not really convinced by Mr. Blanchet-Joncas's argument. I don't think we can compare the number of witnesses that appeared at this study versus any other study, because each study is different. Each study we've assigned a different number of meetings. I believe we've had the number of meetings in this study that the original voted motion called for. So, I remember the first study we did where I wanted to call many, many more witnesses, and that was turned down. So I think that, if we do this for every study, we will be just taking longer and longer. So I would just make that original point. Each study is going to be different in terms of how many witnesses will be necessary to hear the full story, and each study will be different in terms of how many different voices we need to hear. And I believe we have covered the basis on this study.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cannings, and we'll go to Mr. Collins now. Folks,
Thanks, Madam Chair, and it's a very important. Thank you. It has been a very important study, and I agree with Richard in terms of I think we've accomplished what we set out to do in terms of the number of meetings, and we can certainly dissect the reason why certain witnesses for all studies haven't been able to attend. But I think back to the point of how many meetings we've had, and we're starting to hear a lot of repetition in terms of the witnesses that are coming forward. There are some common themes. We're going to hear that and see that, I think, in the final committee report. But having dedicated 4 meetings to this subject, I'm not certain what more we're going to hear beyond what we've heard through 4 meetings. And we're at the point where our friends on the other side of the table have been giving their time to to our block member, which is fine, and that the rules certainly permit that. But I think it says something about where we are with the study, and so I'm not supportive of giving any more time to this one here. I think we've covered all the bases, to use Richard's term, and I think we need to move on to the next study. And I look forward to the analysts preparing the report and going through the recommendations that will come.
Thank you so much, Mr. Collins, and then Mr. Lobb.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And I guess all I would add to the conversation here is that it's just one more meeting, really. I understand that's an entire week, but it is one more meeting, and we did miss a couple of weeks ago, so that would be fine. In addition to that, if any of your witnesses weren't available, it's understandable. We all understand that, and they'd all be able to put forward a written submission to the committee as well. So I think do another meeting, and then they can have written submissions on top of that and get on to the next study, right? Thank you.
So I'm not hearing agreement here. Is there further discussion? And if not, I think this has to go to a vote. Is there further discussion? Monsieur Blanchet-Joncas.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Well, thank you. I'd just like to go back to the comment made earlier with respect to comparing the number of witnesses. Now, I understand that that's not the main argument here, but 14 witnesses, these are witnesses that people put on the list. The list wasn't put together because it's nice outside. No, it's because these are people with expertise who had something to share with us, their concerns with respect to this study. So 13 out of 34, that says a great deal. It's almost 50% of the people on the list who couldn't appear for a variety of reasons. But I think we need to leave the opportunity open for these people to appear. If they can't, then they can confirm it. But I even showed that I was open to the fact that if witnesses say that they don't want to appear or can't come, we can continue on with the current planning. But I don't think we should set aside almost 50%, 14 witnesses who were already on the list and who are very important to be considered and important to hear from as part of this study.
Is there further discussion from the committee? I think I see Mr. Tucker getting ready here.
Yes, Madam Chair. And I just want to, this committee is fairly nonpartisan, and we'd like to hopefully find common ground and compromise here. Why don't we, if we agree to have another meeting, let's have that meeting in 2 weeks' time, which would give the clerk ability to send those invites out, fill that meeting. If that meeting in 2 weeks' time doesn't get filled, for whatever reason, we would backfill it with moonshot witnesses. So we are not out any time. It is unfortunate that we had to miss the one meeting a few weeks ago that would have facilitated maybe some more witnesses. And I think it would be, a respectful thing if we could grant. We're not talking, weeks of additional study. It's just one more meeting. And I would encourage the colleagues to vote in favor of this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. I see Mr. Cannings has his hand up.
Yeah, again, just on that point that Mr. Tucker made, I guess I would just like to ask the clerk how this would affect planning. I understand that next week's meeting has already been planned with witnesses. What about that next meeting 2 weeks out? Would that involve changing witnesses, scheduling? I guess what I'm feeling is if we have a number of witnesses that really wanted to put forward ideas, we could ask them to submit briefs if they haven't done that already. And then, we're already starting this next study momentarily. And I just think we should try to move on to that as best we can. In my experience in committees, we rarely get to hear all the witnesses, and it's unfortunate, but we do get briefs, and we've heard a lot of good information in this study. And but I think we have to manage our time as best as we can, and I think that it's my opinion that the best way to move on would be to use written briefs for those who haven't been able to appear and move on to the next study.
Thank you, Mr. Cannings. Is there further discussion? I do not see agreement here. I mean, do you want to put this to a vote? And as Mr. Tucker says, this committee is generally very collegial, but there does not appear to be agreement. So should we put this to, do you want to put? Yeah, I need someone to. Maxime?
Yes.
You would like it to go to a vote? Let's make sure we're all voting on the same thing. Maxime, is this on the original motion or what Mr. Tucker put forward?
Pas bien long, Madame la Présidente. On va transférer la motion. Puis
We'll be handing out the motion. It can be distributed to colleagues.
Clerk, read it out loud for time's sake, please. Or it's up to the committee? Yep, okay. Thank you.
Okay. d'abord en français, que
First of all, in French, that as part of the study on the publication in French, the committee allocate an additional session on Monday, the 28th of November, in order to enable witnesses who were unable to appear to date to be heard by the committee.
that as part of its study on scientific research and publication in French, the committee allocates one more meeting, Monday, November 28th, in order to allow witnesses who did not get the opportunity to participate in the current study to be heard by the committee.
Okay, is everyone clear on what the motion is? Do we put this to a vote then? Okay, there seems to be agreement. Mr. Clerk, please.
Ms. Bradford,
No.
Mr. Collins,
Nope.
Ms. Diab,
No.
Mr. McKinnon,
No.
Ms. Kayabaga,
Non, je vote non.
It was not a yes.
Ms. Kayabaga, can you repeat,
Fair
please?
enough.
J'ai voté contre.
I voted no.
Mr. Lobb,
Oui.
Mr. Mazer,
Oui.
Mr. Soroka,
Oui.
Mr. Tucker,
Oui.
Monsieur Blanchet-Chonka,
Oui.
Mr. Cannings,
No.
Thank you all. Thank you, Monsieur Blanchet-Chonka. We're going to briefly suspend, and then we're going to start our new study, Moonshot. Thank you all. Suspend it. This meeting back to order, and I'd like to welcome our witnesses. We are excited. We're beginning a new study. It's pursuant to Standing Order 10831 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, September 26, 2022. We're beginning the study of international moonshot programs. J'aimerais faire quelques...
I'd like to make a few observations for the witnesses. Before speaking, please wait to be recognized. If you are participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your microphone. Please make sure you are muted when you are not speaking. For interpretation, those participating through Zoom have the choice at the bottom of their screen between 3 channels, Floor, English, or French. Members attending in person in the room can use their headset after selecting the channel desired. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair.
I'd like to welcome our witnesses. We're very pleased to have you here. The committee is excited to begin this new study. And tonight, we have from MILA, Quebec Artificial Intelligence Institute. We have Joshua Bengio, Scientific Director. And from X Energy Canada, we have Rosemary Yeriman. Uremian. My apologies. Thank you. Vice President, Corporate Strategy and Business Development. We welcome all our witnesses. You will have 5 minutes to present. At the 4.5-minute mark, I will raise this yellow card. It lets you know you have 30 seconds left. And with that, we will begin with Mila and Dr. Bengio. The floor is yours.
Should I start? You hear me? Yes. Okay, so, Madame la Présidente, Madam Chair, I would like to tell you about, why I think such moonshots are important, and more specifically where I think that our government should focus, the kind of effort that it should focus on. So the successes of science that have ended up having transformative impact on our society arose thanks to A, funding of curiosity-driven research, which also trains the needed talent, followed by B, mission-oriented R&D. As an example, in my own career, I've worked on deep learning that has fueled the current AI revolution. These advances were made possible by really broad investments in curiosity-driven research on neural networks, much before these applications became a possibility. But then that was followed by major mission-oriented industrial investments in R&D. In many cases, government funding has been crucial in our society to kickstart major innovation-driven sectors of the economy. And a really well-known historical example is that of the DARPA funding that created the Silicon Valley ecosystem. However, the profit motive of industry is not always sufficient to get this transfer to happen. Because it's not always well aligned with the needs of society. So this process where we rely on industry to create the innovations that follow the basic research does not always work. And in particular, in areas like health, environment, education, or social justice that are typically the domain of the government. I'm going to tell you about one really striking example that I know well about, and that is of antimicrobial resistance, which means bugs that are mutating to become resistant to our drugs. And now we're like facing for example, bacteria that we don't have any drug to defend ourselves against, and it's going to get worse. It's already costing billions per year to Canada. It's going to increase tenfold over the next 2 decades. Right now, there's already 1.2 million deaths per year globally. It's going to grow, projected to 10 million deaths per year. That's comparable to COVID-19 or more. And the costs globally are going to grow to 100 trillion US dollars. That's a projection, of course, if we don't do anything. So you would think that the pharma industry would develop the required drugs to protect us, but it's not happening because of a complicated market failure that makes it not profitable for industry to do the required R&D to protect us. Similarly, there are other related market failures that happen in other areas where we need R&D to fight, for example, climate change, and generally, there's a lack of innovation culture and innovation investments regarding government-funded services. Now, of course, government is already investing a lot in R&D, funding industry as well as academics, but usually it's based on the formula of matching funds with contributions from industry. And that's advantageous because it makes it easier to choose what projects to fund. Presumably, if some company thinks it's worth putting money, then it's probably not a bad idea. But unfortunately, that process discards missions such as the above, for which there's a really important social value, but not a sufficient profit incentive. Now, for academics, there's been a movement on the side of NSERC Alliance funding that helps funding academic research when there is a nonprofit involved. But these kinds of fundings are not really focused on the sort of strategic missions that I think government should be thinking about. On the other hand, for government funding of industry R&D, like the superclusters or R&D tax credits, there's nothing really to try to focus the investment on these kinds of social missions because they also rest on this cost-sharing method. So it's really crucial for governments to provide necessary incentives. It could be financial, regulatory, or both. So what I mean by regulatory, for example, is increasing carbon prices is going to create innovation to fight climate change. So that we can develop a new sector of the economy springing from an ecosystem of innovators to solve these socially important problems. And we need to do that in a way that combines both our strengths in academia as well as the more mission-oriented culture of the private sector. Now, I can understand that this may be difficult for government to decide on what projects should be considered, to evaluate properly these projects.
Professor
Yes.
Bengio, I'm sorry to interrupt. That is the 5 minutes. They go very quickly, but you have a very engaged committee who will want to ask many questions. We thank you for being there, for being here, and there will be lots of questions, I assure you. And now if we could go to Ms. Yeremian for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by asking you all to imagine what a net zero Canada would look like. Our vision is that our transportation sector is powered by non-emitting electricity and GHG-free hydrogen. Northern communities, especially remote communities, have 24/7 access to affordable, non-emitting power and heat. Canada has a distributed energy system where consumers can buy and sell power into the grid to meet fluctuating demands. Canada's oil and gas sector uses non-emitting technology to extract and process resources. Heavy industrial users rely on abundant baseload, carbon-free heat and power, and hydrogen production and water desalination is abundant using non-emitting technology. Advanced Small Modular Reactors, or ASMRs as I call them, are one of the only options that can provide both heat, steam, and power to achieve deep decarbonization in Canada. For the electricity sector, ASMRs can provide emissions-free baseload power for on-grid or off-grid applications. In the agricultural sector, ASMRs can provide heat for greenhouses and clean hydrogen for agricultural equipment. They can be used in a cogeneration mode to heat buildings. For heavy industry, they can provide power, heat, and steam for large industrial users. And they can provide emissions-free power and hydrogen to enable our transition to the electric power vehicle market. And for the oil and gas sector, ASMRs can be used to provide emissions-free power and steam for SAGD extraction and operations. ASMRs are not your grandfather's technology. They use a new form of fuel called TRISO, and I encourage you to ask me about it. But the U.S. Department of Energy calls it the most robust fuel on Earth. And the design of these innovative ASMRs make it simpler and easier to transport, which makes them cost competitive with other forms of generation. ASMRs are also the smallest land footprint of any emitting or non-emitting technology. Canada has an opportunity to be a real leader in this emerging lucrative market. We're blessed with a strong and capable nuclear sector and nuclear supply chain in Canada. Our current supply chain can be built out across the country, resulting in significant economic benefits for Canada, which will position Canada to take advantage of this market, which is estimated to be $150 billion by 2040. To achieve real decarbonization in Canada, we will need to deploy ASMRs as part of a national strategy, which should include, 1, the acceleration of deployment of ASMRs through public investment capital for both public utilities and private corporations. 2, the modernization of regulatory frameworks to provide climate considerations, including streamlining regulatory requirements such as impact assessment timelines. And finally, supporting the Canadian supply chain to develop the capability needed to supply ASMRs and to allow Canada's economy to benefit from early adoption. In closing, we believe Canada must seize this opportunity to decarbonize a variety of sectors using ASMRs, while at the same time positioning us to benefit from the enormous economic benefits of being a leader in the emerging global ASMR market. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Uremian. I'd like to thank both our witnesses. We're really grateful you've come tonight, and it's late at night, and we're looking forward to hearing more about your expertise. So we are now going to go from hearing from our committee. It's the 6-minute round, and tonight we begin with Mr. Mazier. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are going to be for X-Energy. The United States is investing in nuclear energy as a clean source of energy. While our American neighbors understand the importance of technology over taxes, here in Canada, the Liberals plan to triple the carbon tax on Canadians, working Canadians. The United States Department of Energy has announced millions of dollars in funding towards nuclear energy through their Advanced Research Projects Agency. They stated that in a recent press release, and I quote, "Nuclear power is one of the most reliable sources of energy in America and the largest domestic source of clean energy, providing 52% of our nation's carbon-free electricity in 2020, and about a fifth of the U.S. electricity overall," end quote. In 2018, Canada's Environment Minister tweeted, and I quote, "It's time to close Pickering #nuclear plant and go for #renewables." What do you say to Canada's Environment Minister who refuses to publicly support the development of clean, renewable nuclear energy?
Thank you. We're going to need everything, right? We're going to need every form of technology, renewables, non-renewables, anything that's not emitting. The beauty of advanced small modular reactors is that they can pair with renewables, so they can load follow up and down to meet fluctuating demand. Renewables are an intermittent source of electricity, so they only work when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. And that's okay, because we can fill, advanced small modular reactors can fill the gap there. And so we've designed our SMRs to specifically pair with renewables and maximize the contribution from renewable energy.
So I think if I heard you correctly, though, too, we need government, all the government departments moving in the same direction. Everybody needs to put good behind it. Good, thank you. The Americans appear to be embracing nuclear energy as a reliable and clean source of energy, and to do so, countries around the world are also as well investing in nuclear energy. When I was on the Environment Committee, we consistently heard that the only way to meet our net zero targets is through nuclear energy. Do you agree with this? Yes. And since we are studying international moonshot programs, do you think Canada should view the development of nuclear energy as a moonshot program to reduce global emissions?
I do.
Can you expand on that? What would be the difference in the type of approach of doing a moonshot program?
Renewables can only get us part of the way there. They're really ideally suited for electricity generation. The beauty of advanced small modular reactors is that they can do more than just electricity generation. They can replace the steam generators in the oil sands. They can replace diesel generation up north. They can fill more gaps than renewables can do alone. As an example, Dow Chemical in the U.S. just bought one of our XE100 plants to provide both power and heat for their operations. And there is an ability to sell power back to the grid when they're not using it. So this can actually be cost competitive for large industrial users.
If we took the moonshot type of approach, what would that mean, the difference in the nuclear development in Canada, like the United States? Would it be a good thing, and how would we go about doing that?
Right now, what we're seeing is a lot of developers building in the U.S. as opposed to Canada because of their recognition of nuclear energy as a clean energy option. If we were to develop a moonshot program around advanced small modular reactors, we would give the public recognition to advanced small modular reactors because some of our legacy history is the social license. And while X-Energy and many others have been doing a lot of consultations with Indigenous groups and unions and at the grassroots level, as a private sector company, we can only do so much. With a moonshot program, we would have both the government's backing for this technology as well as some incentives, hopefully, to help us make this a reality.
Thank you. I'm going to read some press releases that were issued by the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy in the United States. So, U.S. Department of Energy announces up to $10 million to study low-energy nuclear reactions. U.S. Department of Energy announces $36 million to reduce waste from advanced nuclear reactors. U.S. Department of Energy awards $38 million for projects leading used nuclear fuel recycling initiative. And the U.S. Department of Energy announces $40 million to reduce fuel waste from advanced nuclear reactors. The U.S. clearly sees the moonshot as an opportunity with nuclear energy. Do you think Canada should focus more on advancing nuclear energy? Yes. And the floor is yours. Go ahead and add on to that.
The U.S. is a great example of what can happen when a government stands behind their technology. For instance, X-Energy was provided $1.2 billion to develop and deploy our XE100. And what I think makes that successful, the government backing a technology, is that it's more saleable to private sector companies and to other countries. And this large investment encourages private sector companies to adopt this technology.
Chair, if I could ask you to table.
Okay, yes, that's fine.
Table some of the misinformation and misconceptions about nuclear energy to the committee for our study. That'd be just fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mazur. Thank you. And now we will go to Ms. Bradford for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you so much to both of our witnesses tonight, and congratulations on being our first witness panel on this exciting new study that we're doing. So, Mr. Bengio, you gave us a good overview in your initial opening comments about the two different kind of streams, mission-oriented research as opposed to curiosity, or sometimes referred to as high risk, high reward. Can you talk to the committee about the benefits and limitations of both mission-oriented research and curiosity-driven research? And is there one that is more useful than the other in a moonshot program?
Well, really, you need both, and they play different roles. The initial phases of research cannot be completely directed because it's not clear ahead of time where are going to be the moonshots. But if you want, the curiosity-driven research is helping us figuring out what the moonshots are. What are the directions where it's worth having a significant investment? And most of the curiosity-driven research is happening in academia. But there's also more applied research in academia. The more mission-oriented research is important because it's focusing the efforts in a particular direction. It's not exploring all very widely. And we also, you have to realize that it's actually quite costly to do these things. Engineers, more engineers than researchers, for example. So you need both things. One thing that I would like to add here is that I don't think we currently have the right funding style and programs to do moonshot research right now in Canada. Even our funding of industry research tends to be very, all across the board and not very directed. So, and as I said, there are good reasons for that. It's not so easy to decide what are the right orientations, but that's a place where people who do the kind of more basic research, like academics, can really be helpful and help the governments both to identify moonshots and then to evaluate proposals, projects that may come from industry.
Okay, so thank you for that. So building on that, how can the government best support a mix of both curiosity-based research and mission-oriented research? Because as you said, we need to do both.
Yeah. Yes. One thing that government already does is that in some of the programs in that's funding academia is to sort of force the industry partners and academic partners to work together for the funding to happen. I think this is a good part of the recipe. But I would add something that is currently missing if you look at especially the funding that we do for the private sector, like the superclusters and so on, which is we're lacking the kind of strings attached to these research contracts to really facilitate the sharing of the data and the knowledge that is generated. So I'm going to go back to my example of antimicrobial discovery, like discovering new antibiotics and techniques to do that efficiently, like AI. We need the knowledge that's generated, the assays, the data that's generated by the biological assays, the new algorithms, to be shared across the ecosystem of companies and academics who will be developing this. And this is not the usual way of doing things when most of the investment comes from industry for the reasons that have to do with how our economy works, which is reasonable. But when the money is coming from governments, it's a big waste of our efforts if the discoveries that are made by one organization cannot be used easily by other organizations. And this, I think that there's an opportunity here to change the ways we're doing to make it much more efficient for our tax dollars to reach the moonshot goals.
A bit of a shift of topic. I understand that you're concerned with the social impact of AI and whether it benefits everyone, and have contributed to the Montreal Declaration for the Responsible Development of Artificial Intelligence. Can you tell the committee more about the declaration and what role do ethical considerations have in developing moonshot-type programs more generally? The issue.
Yes. So AI is one of those technologies that is becoming more and more powerful as we develop it more. There are other technologies like biotechnology, for example, that can have both immensely positive uses as we develop it in society, but can also be misused. It's very important for governments to either regulate or incentivize or intensify the development that is going to happen to make sure that those efforts work for society in general, for the benefit of democracy and for the benefit of our well-being and so on. That's what was behind the general ideas of the Montreal Declaration, going through 10 ethical principles. But if I focus now on the moonshot thing, the important message here is that we can't just leave it alone to the markets to decide what are the interesting directions that are needed. And I gave the example of antimicrobials, but I could give examples in the context of, for example, discovery of new materials for carbon capture or better energy storage. There are incentives.
I'm sorry to interrupt. The
right.
worst part of this job is having to interrupt good testimony, but hopefully someone will pick up on that line of questioning. We're now going to go to Monsieur Blanchet-Joncar pour 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les...
Well, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the witnesses who are here for the third hour of our committee meeting. Mr. Bengio, it's a privilege to have you as a witness here this evening. Allow me as well to highlight the contribution of your contribution to science. I've also read that you have been pointed out and recognized by the most influential scientists across the world. Stanford University has congratulated you. So we're very proud to have you in Quebec and at the Artificial Intelligence Institute that you created, MILA. Now, I have some questions for you, Mr. Bengio, and I'd like to know how the federal government, can create a vision. Now, you're an expert on artificial intelligence. In your opinion, is Canada's vision detailed enough? You said in the past that we can't allow the markets to determine priorities, so I'd like to hear your comments on that. Well, I think that there can be some market priorities, but because of what I explained in terms of the problems in the market, there are some sectors or needs that aren't fulfilled, and the government can play a role to advance those. In some cases, it's urgent. If we talk about climate change, for example, or health problems that we could face in the years to come, we can't wait for things to change in the market. Now, what's difficult, and as I was trying to explain, is how to determine what the right moonshots are. Each organization, each company will put forth ideas, and in the part of my comments that I didn't have time to get into, I was going to talk about the international discussions that are underway, looking at what the biggest needs are across the planet. When we talk about climate change, for example, but where do they need the most innovation? What are the directions, or where's the greatest potential for positive change? I think that we should focus on consultations with our partners, with our international partners, with international organizations that are interested in those issues, so that we can identify the moonshots, as well as discussing these issues with academics in Canada who are more neutral than those people who have things to sell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bengio. I'd like to get back to AI. Quebec is 7th in terms of AI, according to the Global AI Index in the world. Can the federal government get inspiration from some of what the government of Quebec has done to invest in AI, for example, for a strategic plan and so on? Well, first, to correct you, it's the federal government that took charge of the strategy, the Pan-Canadian strategy on AI, and we were lucky in Quebec to have the government decide to double the investments in AI. In my institute, Mila, for example, 2/3 of our funding comes from the provincial government and 1/3 from the federal government. But that's not the important point. The important point is to work together to identify which are the most important missions, and that we need to do that with our international partners also. So you're saying that the most important thing is to work together. How is the cooperation going between the federal government and government of Quebec, in your view, especially with the AI? Well, for AI, it's good. The communication channels are open, and that's not where the problems lie. There are more problems in the area such as health data, where clearly it's more of a patchwork. And there are also problems. Well, I'll just leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Benjo. I was also looking at, well, in the annual report, you're co-chair of the consultation group on AI. We can see that Canada is trying to position itself as one of the innovators on the world stage in AI, and I know that there's a lot of competition across the globe. What can we do specifically, concretely, the things to focus on, and what kind of program should we build as a moonshot program? Are there programs elsewhere that we could draw inspiration from? Well, I think we have incredible opportunities in Canada to really showcase even more what we're doing, not just in basic research. We already have clear things to show for that, but also on the side of things that will help society. AI can be very transformative in terms of application, but in terms of impact on society, economic growth, both in terms of the economy and health, there's an intersection between biotechnology and AI. We have an industry, a pharmaceutical biotechnological industry that's quite developed. We have some of the best AI ecosystems. And we really need to see the two interact.
Blanchet Joncat, you know I aim to be fair, friends. With that, we're going to go to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. This is very interesting, and I'd like to stay with Mr. Benjo. It's very, very fascinating to me to hear about how we could develop moonshots. And, you know, by definition, as you were saying, these are immense projects, very complex, international in scope, because they are tackling the big questions of our time, whether it's health related, whether it's climate action, et cetera. And, you know, you talked about how we need to decide what the best moonshots are. And this has to be developed with our international partners. If you have any idea of how that process could be, you know, are there any other projects that we've done recently in the world that have shown us the way to do this, how we can decide as a world community to get together and really put our forces together to tackle these problems?
Well, okay, I have several examples. I mean, the IPCC is doing an amazing job in the area of climate to point out problems and areas that need more effort. Here in Canada, we have an organization that's been extraordinary to fund at a very small scale, but still moonshot research. And that's CFAR, the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. And actually, the deep learning kind of origin in Canada, you know, happened because of their investment. So they the way this works is they put out a call for proposals, and hundreds of groups put out proposals, and then a first short proposal, and then these are evaluated by international scientists of various areas. We have ways of doing these things in the scientific community to compare and evaluate and take these kinds of decisions. Of course, we also need, because this is going to be to solve societal problems, people from governments, from industry to be part of these discussions. But I think there are processes that we already know about to do these sort of things.
And once we have those, once we've decided on what moonshot we're doing, once we've come up with a strategy, a plan of how we're going to tackle this, of course, that will help us find out what further information we need, what data we need to share. And I know in a federation like Canada, data sharing is complex or difficult or impossible at times, let alone around the world. I come from that background of trying to crosswalk data across provinces, and it's very, very frustrating. And when we're talking about these issues, even more so. But then it comes down to the funding as well,
Yes.
And yes, some funding will come from industry if they see a role in it, if they see an advantage for them. But a lot would have to come from various levels of government. And again, are there examples of elsewhere in the world that Canada can look to?
Yeah. So one model
to improve our models of funding.
Okay, let me answer maybe partially by telling you about a particular kind of moonshot that happened recently about what's called a cell atlas. So it was about mapping out what different cells and different organisms are doing. And this is of interest both to academics and industry in the pharmaceutical industry. And what's interesting about the way that this happened, and by the way, this was led by somebody who's now heading Genentech, which is one of the big biotechs. The way this happened was fairly decentralized. So there was not just a single source of funding. So scientists from around the world met together and tried to define what they thought were how we should join forces, what are the big questions, and drafted proposals for what should be funded, what efforts should be done. And then different organizations, different researchers in different countries went after, convinced their funders to fund them for this thing. But the important thing is that it was coordinated internationally, so that all the results were put together and made available to the whole scientific community. So this is interesting. So, it was more organic in some sense. Instead of having like one big funder that decides everything, it came because of a consensus of scientists thinking, like, this is important. And these are the different things that need to be done. And then individual groups went after their funders, philanthropy, government funding to fund different parts of this. And this has been an immense success.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, do I have any time left?
30 seconds left.
Seconds?
30.
30 seconds. Okay, quickly in 30 seconds, perhaps, Mr. Benja, if you could just talk about the transparency that's needed with the public, the trust from the public, getting the public behind these moonshots, because that's, I think, really core to their success.
Yes, I completely agree. And to come back to the previous question about the Montreal Declaration, one of the things we talked about, and I think is really important for the development of responsible AI, but also in these cases where we found expensive research, is transparency. Transparency of the process to decide where we invest in, transparency of how the work is done, and transparency of the results. Because this is going to help, speed up progress and make sure we don't waste our money.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Cannings. Thank you again to our witnesses. We're really grateful that you're here tonight. We're now going to go to the 5-minute round, and I understand Mr. Lobb and Mr. Tucker are sharing. Do you want me to do this at the halfway mark? That'd be great. Okay. I will hand it to you, Mr. Lobb.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. First question is for Madam Uremian. And my question is, in regards to moonshots, nuclear reactors, Bruce Power is in my riding, so obviously very familiar with nuclear energy and been an advocate for years. But here's the problem I see. The moonshot maybe needs to be, how do we speed up the environmental assessment approval process? Bruce Power site is probably the most studied site in the world over 50 years. And yet, I understand the fastest you could get an assessment done for a new reactor is probably about 8 to 10 years. So if we really want to have a moonshot and make progress on the environment and emissions and everything else, wouldn't that be the place to start, is to figure out how to do it in 2 or 3? What do you think?
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of environmental assessments. I don't want to cut corners, but 7 years for the Bruce Power environmental assessment was just way too long for a site that has been studied beyond anything that anyone could possibly ever do more. I was literally just on Friday in a meeting with a mining executive in Saskatchewan who told me if the environmental assessments are longer than 2 years, we're just going to go to diesel generation because there's no problem there. So it's really a matter of the environmental assessment piece being a competitive disadvantage for Canada.
Thank you. Thank you. And for Mr. Bengio there on Zoom, this goes to part that I see in my many years as a member of Parliament, and I know Chair Duncan probably feels the same way. There are issues that have been around for 14 years that are still issues. Issues about the backlog and getting people processed for immigration applications. People to be, our port systems. It doesn't matter what end of the coast you're on, there have been issues with the ports forever. We just talked about environmental assessments, our healthcare system, homelessness, drug addiction. It goes on and on and on to the point where you can't even put children's Tylenol on the shelves in this country anymore. Do we need a moonshot in common sense? And how do you think we can fix this? Because, I mean, we're trying to do the craziest things that would maybe solve society, but we can't even do the most simple things. What do you think? How can you help us here?
This is a great question. I wish I had answers, but let me try something. I had a sentence in my pitch about the lack of an innovation culture in everything that has to do with government services. So I don't know how to fix this, but I think that there is the Canadians need our the services that our governments give to be improving and getting better, and the kind of culture and investment in R&D that, say, happens in the private sector is not happening so much, not nearly enough for the things that government provide. And I think this is something that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Running out of time here, but X-Energy runs different kinds of fuel through the reactor. Can you explain that a little bit further for the committee, please?
I'd be happy to. So we use a form of fuel called triso fuel. And the beauty of this fuel is that it's been called, as I said in my remarks, the most robust fuel on Earth. So if you'll let me geek out for a moment, I'll tell you a bit about it. We take a poppy seed-sized kernel of uranium, carbon, and oxygen. We then coat it in 3 layers of ceramic using pharmaceutical-grade technology. 19,000 of those kernels are then put in a ball and covered in graphite. Graphite doesn't melt under any temperature a nuclear reactor can get to. So you're left with a very safe, very robust fuel that nobody can take apart and do anything nefarious with. It's sealed, it's contained. When anyone can just, if someone walks away from the control room, not that they would, but if they did, the reactor would just slightly go up and then shut down on its own. And that's the beauty of our fuel.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lobb and Mr. Tucker. Again, we're grateful to our witnesses. And now we're going to go to Mr. Collins for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for attending this evening. I want to start with Professor Bengio. Sir, are you aware of best practices or design principles for deploying moonshots? You've jumped around, I know, because time's limited tonight, and you've given some examples of programs here in Canada that have been supported. But is there a blueprint outside of Canada that we should turn to as a starting point for developing policies related to the same?
So I already mentioned the Cell Atlas project. Let me mention another organization that was recently created in the US called BARDA, which I don't remember exactly the acronym, but it's like Biomedical Research, Advanced Research something. And what it's meant to do is to fund mission-oriented research and development to protect Americans from potential biomedical threats. That includes pandemics and also like have terrorism and things like this. So I think this is a great initiative. I think that we don't have to do exactly the same thing, but I think there are lots of interesting lessons to take. I already mentioned how DARPA, which has been around since the 60s, has completely transformed the American economy. I mean, it was meant to fund military research, but as a side effect of wanting to develop better electronics, it gave rise to the revolution that you know about. I think that having these mission-oriented organizations, and I'm not saying they're perfect, they're like interesting examples, in places where the markets would not have gone or would have gone much later, is really essential. I haven't done like a study to compare all of these things, but this is something that could be done.
Okay. Follow-up question. You talked about the traditional funding model that we're used to, and that is matching funding between the government and our private industry partners. And then you referenced that we need to attach some strings to a new funding scenario or program that might be created by the government. What do those strings look like in terms of conditions or
thanks for asking.
Criteria?
Yeah. So the strings would be first on the topic. So right now, if you look at R&D tax credits or superclusters, I mean, superclusters are somewhat in a limited area, but overall, the money is spread out very, very broadly, and that can have nice advantages. But for these moonshots, that's not what we need. We need to have a much clearer picture of what needs to be done, and only fund those efforts that are aligned with that, sufficiently aligned with that. So that's number one. It's kind of obvious. That's the point of a moonshot. Number two, that is less obvious, is and maybe more difficult, is to force the organizations that are going to be using government money to do that work to be transparent. I was talking about before. That means sharing the knowledge that has been generated, sharing the data that has been generated, sharing the code. In some cases, we want also to make sure that the IP or the licenses that are going to be attached to the created property to be easily and cheaply transferable, for example, in developing countries. The reason this is important is think about, say, pandemics or climate change. Like, we really want poor countries in Africa to use the technology we might develop so that it's going to protect us against climate change. It's going to protect us against the future pandemics. So we need, but we need to put that up front in the contracts that we sign with companies.
Okay, and those strings and conditions there are examples in other countries around the world who have moonshot programs and funding available to academia and the private market?
Yeah, so for example, for these kinds of licenses, one example I know about is the Gates Foundation. So the Gates Foundation is a huge funder of moonshot things, precisely, and they have such clauses, yes. And I think other foundations have similar things.
All right.
And I
last
think
question I would have is...
Mr. Collins, that's the end.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. And again, thank you to the witnesses. We're going to, because we started late, we will go for 5 more minutes, and that will give Monsieur Blanchette-Joncat and Mr. Cannings their last 2.5 minutes. So, Monsieur Blanchette-Joncat, the floor is yours.
Désolé, Madame la Présidente, je suis pas certain qu'on...
Sorry,
I'm sorry, this is the last round then? So we were talking about not adding extra time for the last study, but now here, perhaps you could explain to it why it's possible to add some time to this round, but not on the other round, where we also lost some time because of technical problems.
Monsieur Blanchette-Joncat, we aim to be very fair in this committee. I cannot help if one of the witnesses had technology issues and we lost many minutes. And then we lost in the second round because of debate. So we try to be fair, and I think you all know I'm fair to a T. So if you would like your 2.5 minutes, the floor is yours.
Non, point d'information, Madame la Présidente.
Well, for information then, Madam Chair, for the technical problems then, we could have some unanimous consent to add some additional minutes to extend the study then.
Would you repeat that,
Oui,
Monsieur?
donc...
So when there are technical problems then, we can ask for unanimous consent among members of the committee to add some extra time to the study. Is that correct then?
Thank you for the question. That's for an individual speaker. You would ask for unanimous consent. It does not apply to an agenda item. And again, I cannot help if there were technology issues. I mean, the committee ends at 9:30. I'm trying to be as fair as possible. And in the second study, the second hour, it's unfortunate that time was lost during debate. Would you like your time for this?
C'est parfait, Madame la Présidente. De mon côté, merci beaucoup.
That's fine, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Monsieur Blanchette-Joncat. Mr. Cannings, would you like your last 2.5 minutes?
In the interest of time, I know it's late where you are. It's not so late where I am, but I haven't had dinner yet, so I will cede my time as well and especially let the translators and the staff get home after a very long day. So thank you all.
Mr. Cannings. And with that, I'm going to say, colleagues, I'm going to say thank you to our clerk, to our analysts, to our interpreters, to everyone who supports this committee, who works so hard for all of us. And I'd like to really thank our witnesses. We appreciate your expertise, and thank you for joining us so late. We hope you've had a good experience and you will come back and join us.
Thank you.